copyright last? In recent decades, we have seen repeated extension of length of copyright. Right now, the European Union wants to extend the copyright on sound recordings by 20 years. I'm sure in 20 years later, they'll extend it by another 20, right? That's what they're going to do in the US also. In 1998 in the US, they extended all copyrights by 20 years on both past works and future works. Now, they said that the extension was to make more incentive to make these works. How can they make more incentive to make works written in the 1920s and 30s by extending their copyright now? What are they going to do? Use a time machine to inform the authors back then? You're going to get 20 more years of copyright, so start writing. If they have a time machine, they didn't use it. Why don't they use it? Why don't they tell those authors, you know, we paid the price, when are we going to get the benefit? Now, for future works yet to be written, it's at least conceivable theoretically that extending copyright for them would create more motivation to write them, but not for any rational author. Because copyright already lasted so long. It was 50 years after the author's death. And they gave 20, so now it's 70 years after the author's death. You know, an economist will tell you that the discounted present value of those extra years of copyright that far in the future are so small, it shouldn't rationally change your decision about anything. The only real reason for these copyright extensions is they're demanded by business and then legislated by subservient governments that are part of the empire of the megacorporations. That's what's going on. Those companies have monopolies that they've had for a long time and which are scheduled to expire. And those companies don't want these monopolies ever to expire. For instance, in 1998, Disney saw that the copyright on the first film where Mickey Mouse appeared was going to expire. Well, Disney didn't want that copyright to expire, so it paid congressmen to extend the monopoly for 20 more years. That's how laws are made in the US most of the time. They're bought and sold by businesses and sold by congressmen. So their plan is every 20 years they will extend it 20 years more. And that way, you see, the movie companies say they want perpetual copyright. But they don't have the power yet to change the US Constitution, which says copyright has to last for a limited time. So their idea is every 20 years extend it 20 more years. And that way, no work will ever go into the public domain again. So that's one dimension, time. But what about the more important dimension of breadth? Which activities should copyright restrict? In the age of the printing press, copyright was not conceived of as intended to restrict all uses of a published copyrighted work. There were certain uses that were restricted, but those were the exceptions within a broader space of unregulated free use of these works. However, the publishers realize that digital technology offers them the opportunity to seize total control. If you set up computer systems which are not under the control of their users, well, then they control the users, and that's what the publishers want to do. They are systematically pushing for the design of, for software and the hardware to be designed to restrict us. Many programs and digital products have digital handcuffs. That is, intentionally developed features, malicious features, to restrict the user. These are known as DRM, Digital Restrictions Management. The first place the public saw this was with DVDs. The video on a DVD can be encrypted, and the encryption format was secret. And the purpose of this encryption was only to restrict the users. Some companies set up the DVD conspiracy, and they designed the secret format. And then they said, anyone that wants to make a DVD player is going to have to sign and promise to make his DVD players restrict the user, just like all the other DVD players, according to these rules. And that's why all the DVD players you can get restrict you in the same ways, because they're all made by members of this conspiracy. And originally it worked, but then people figured out the format and released some free software capable of of decrypting and displaying the video on your screen. Now, that's lawful. You have supposedly the legal right to watch the video if you bought the DVD, but this free software is now censored. It started in the US, and the censorship then spread to the European Union and many other countries. Censorship of software. Specifically, they censor the software that can be used to break digital handcuffs. So in this battle between the media and technology companies and the public, the government is on the side of the companies against the public. Almost all of the countries of Europe implemented that directive in a nastier way than was required. So they were falling over themselves in the rush to attack their own citizens. So, however, the movie companies understood that no matter what laws they passed, they can't make this program disappear. It's easy to get a copy. So they developed another system of encryption to restrict people more thoroughly. It's called AACS. I sometimes call it the axe. And they assumed that nobody would ever be able to break the axe. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, someone released free software to decrypt that. Except it wouldn't work, because in order to really use it, you'd need to know the key. And the key was still secret. And then I saw a photo of 2 adorable puppies, and over them were 32 hex numbers. And I thought, why would anyone put these hex digits together with puppies? I wonder if this number is a key that we're not supposed to have. And maybe they put it together with the puppies thinking people would save the picture because the puppies are so cute. And in this way, the key would not be lost. And that's what it was. That was the key to break the axe. And it was posted on Dig, and the editors of Dig, obediently to the empire, deleted it. And it was posted again, and they deleted it. When it was posted hundreds of times, they said, "We give up." And then 2 weeks later, searching for this, found it in 700,000 web pages. This, unfortunately, was not a conclusive victory. They just changed the key. So, it would have been better if they'd waited a couple of years and then published it. conquered more with that victory. In any case, the fight goes on. Blu-ray discs use AACS, but they also have another level of digital restrictions management, which I believe has not been broken at all in free software. As a result, we have to consider Blu-ray discs a malicious product. Never use them. Don't buy them, don't rent them, don't accept them as gifts. Don't touch them at all, unless you're working on breaking this DRM. Because you must never accept any product designed to attack your freedom unless you personally have the means to defeat the attack, to break the digital handcuffs. So, for instance, I don't have the free program to decrypt a DVD. And the reason is, in France, the mere possession of a copy is an offense for which people can be sentenced to prison. And I go to France from time to time, so I decided just not to have this program, and that way I have no problems. Of course, I have no way to play an encrypted DVD, and I don't have any. And I'm perfectly content not having it. Why give Hollywood any money anyway? So, that's what's happening in video, but we've also seen DRM in music. About a decade ago, we started to see things that looked like compact discs, but they were not written according to the specs for compact discs, so we called them corrupt discs. And in some European countries, they were required to be labeled as such. They couldn't have the compact disc logo. Instead, they said something else. And I once gave a speech about this in Spain. I was invited by a regional government. And so they gave me some books and some music CDs about their region. And one of these CDs was by a musician I'd heard of, so I wanted to listen to it. But fortunately, before I opened it, I saw the symbol that said, copy control. This disc can be played on Windows and Macintosh systems. So I gave it back and I said, here you see the face of the enemy. Please return it to the store because they should not keep your money. And I've never heard that music. I'll live. It's too bad for that musician, but that, you know, some people won't get to hear his music because of what they did to him. But this is the only thing we can do, is refuse. Now, Sony had a clever idea for how to make corrupt discs. They put some software on the disc, so if you put the disc into a computer, the software would get loaded, and this software was like a virus, or it's like what a cracker uses to take control of the machine. It's called a rootkit. It's software that when it runs, takes control of the system and installs itself deep within the system. And what does the software do? Well, it restricts what you can do with the music on the disc. It also changes other commands to disguise its presence in the system. It also changed another command so that you couldn't easily get rid of this software. Now, like a virus, basically. And this was a serious crime, a felony. People could have gone to jail for doing this. But that wasn't the only felony Sony committed, because some of the code in this program was copied from a program of free software that had been released under copyleft, under the GNU General Public License. And the GNU General Public License says you're free to copy and redistribute this, but any program that you put this in, if you want to be permitted to release that, you have to release it under the same license. And you have to give users the source code, and you have to give them a copy of the license to tell them their rights. And Sony didn't do any of these things. So this was commercial copyright infringement, which is also a crime. Now, of course, Sony was not prosecuted because the government is on Sony's side against people. But people did sue Sony. Unfortunately, they focused their criticism not on the evil purpose of Sony, but rather on the other nasty things that were part of Sony's methods. Thus, Sony was able to settle the suit by promising that in the future, when they attack our freedom, they won't do these other things on the side that were illegal. And Sony learned its lesson, because in the future, when you, in the future, the rootkit will be built into your computer before you buy it, and it will be impossible to remove, and it will be called AACS. Now, we also saw music distribution on the net with digital restrictions management. But then it mostly disappeared. We started to see the major record companies selling music without DRM. What happened was they signed a deal with Apple, and then they didn't like the deal. They saw that it had given Apple all the power. And their contract said that they could only sell the music themselves if they sold it without DRM. So that's what they had to do. And lo and behold, it worked. So then Apple mostly took away the DRM as well on music. But Apple is still the head of the spearhead of DRM in general. Apple is an extremely malicious company. And that's why we have I-ban stickers out there. And now I'm sad to say that there, and also on the net there were various music subscription services, where as long as you kept paying, you could still listen to the copies you had downloaded with DRM, and if you ever stopped paying, then you would lose everything. And some fools subscribed to these things, and they failed, and then the services were discontinued and people lost everything that they had paid for. And you'd think people would have learned by now, but there's something else called Spotify, which is sort of similar. It's based on a proprietary client program designed with DRM. And this program does streaming, meaning that some server sends music in packets to your machine, and as they're coming in, your machine plays the music. But the program is written to restrict you, because it could perfectly easily save a copy of that music on your machine. Why doesn't it? Because it was written to restrict you. This is DRM. There's nothing technologically about streaming that says that a copy can't be saved. That's just a policy decision imposed on the users through a program that the users don't control. You see, all these DRM schemes are based on proprietary software, because proprietary software controls the user. If the developer puts in a DRM or any other kind of malicious feature, the users can't fix it. With free software, the users control the software, so if there were any malicious feature, the users could remove it and fix it and make the program do what they want it to do, which means it's not an effective means of controlling people. So, of course, those who want to control people do it with proprietary software. So DRM always attacks your freedom at two levels. Its purpose is to attack your freedom, to restrict you in a particular way in the use of the copies you obtain of various works. And the means is proprietary software, which attacks your freedom at a different level. So it's always two levels of attack on your freedom. So the battle is not over in music. And meanwhile, we see another attack of DRM on books. That's what eBooks are all about. Strictly speaking, an ebook means a book in a digital format. That's not necessarily bad. But in practice, when publishers talk about ebooks, they usually mean restrictions. That's what they are. Oh, what do I do here? I just got a cramp in my toe. Let's see. Okay. I found a way to get rid of it. I never had a cramp in my toe before. Anyway. So, we see products like the Sony Shredder and the Amazon Swindle. Those are not the official names. The official name is the Sony Reader, but I think if we put on SH and make it Shredder, it's more descriptive. And Amazon's product is officially called the Kindle, but Swindle is more descriptive. So, what do these things do? They're designed to attack the traditional freedoms of readers. Freedoms such as to buy a book anonymously by paying for it with cash. That's the only way I buy books. I refuse to identify myself when I buy books because it's dangerous to society to allow Big Brother to know who buys what book. But if you use the Amazon Swindle, then Amazon knows, because the only place to buy most modern books is from Amazon. And Amazon requires customers to identify themselves. So Amazon has a list of all the books that each person has bought. This is a list that is so dangerous to our freedom, so useful to any tyrant, that it must not be allowed to exist anywhere. And then, if you have a book, you can give it away, or lend it to your friends, or sell it. The Swindle takes away all those freedoms with digital restrictions management. And it even takes away the freedom to keep the book for as long as you wish, because it has a back door. We found out about this back door in 2009 because Amazon used it in a spectacular way to delete remotely a large number of copies of a particular book. So Amazon just sent these commands to these swindles and they deleted that book. And these were copies that people had bought from Amazon that disappeared. In some cases, the person was reading the book and it was gone. Oh, the book with which Amazon demonstrated the Orwellian nature of its product was 1984 by George Orwell. If I were making this up as fiction, I wouldn't dare to make it up that way. People would say, that's too unbelievable. But that's what happens. And then Amazon said, we won't do it again unless the government tells us to. What a comfort that is. Amazon calls this the Kindle. Kindle means to start a fire. Apparently, the purpose of this product is to burn our books. And to destroy our friendships. Because friendship among people who read is lending books to each other. And with these devices, people can't lend books to each other anymore. Imagine going to a friend's house, and instead of a shelf full of books, there's nothing. And it's not because your friend doesn't read. Instead, it's because all of your friend's books are in a device, and the only way he can lend you any of them is to lend you his whole library, which is obviously too much to ask. It's not even really feasible for you to just look at what he has. Imagine what this would do to friendships. So make sure all your friends know before they consider buying one of these devices that using it would be tantamount to ending their friendships. Make sure they know this before they fall into the trap, when they can still think about it and say no. Now, the push for ebooks began a decade ago. Lots of publishers wanted to publish ebooks. You could buy ebook readers. And one publisher had the idea that they could start off their line of encrypted, user-restricting ebooks with a real bang if they started with a biography of me. So they got together with an author, and the author came to ask for my cooperation. And I said, only if they publish this book without encryption so that it doesn't restrict people. And he went back to the publisher, and the publisher wouldn't accept that. So I said, too bad, but I'm not going to agree. He was flabbergasted. He couldn't imagine anybody would actually give up the chance to have a book published about him over a mere matter of idealism about how it would be done. But it happened. And then he found another publisher who agreed to publish it without encryption, and in fact agreed to put the source text with the markup on the net under a free license. So he finished the book, it was published, it sold lots of copies, I gather, and it's now out of print. But we are going to publish a revised edition. So, in any case, ebooks failed 10 years ago. And so a lot of people were relieved, and I said, they're going to try again. Why are there all these articles in magazines about electronic paper? It's because they're preparing that for the next generation of ebook readers so that they can come and attack our freedom again. All we've done is driven them off. They don't give up. And that's what happened. So now they're trying again, and they're having somewhat more success than the first time, so we have to defeat them. Now, I've told you about DRM conspiracies. Conspiracies of companies to make our technology restrict us. You might wonder how I know that this is done by conspiracies. It's because these conspiracies are not secret. They have websites where they proudly state what they are trying to do to us and who is behind it all. For instance, I visited the website of AACS, where it stated the rules that they impose on anyone wanting to make a Blu-ray player, for instance. One of the rules was, in a certain year, I think it was 2011 or 2013, analog video outputs would be prohibited. You see, they say they want to close the analog hole. Let me show you a couple of analog holes that they would like to close. So they have a bunch of rules, and they had this complicated contract. I only looked at a little bit of it. But the site also listed the companies that established the conspiracy. They included Intel and AMD and IBM and Apple and Microsoft and Disney and Sony and I think Philips. So there they were admitting that they made a conspiracy to attack our freedom. These conspiracies ought to land the executives in prison. They should be treated just like conspiracies to fix prices. If our government's meant to serve us instead of dominate us. Because these DRM systems are set up, oh, and by the way, the DRM in music is usually a conspiracy between a technology company and record companies. The DRM in the Amazon swindle is a conspiracy between Amazon and publishers. Usually one company is not in a position to do this by itself. So because these attempts to attack our freedom are organized, we need to organize to fight back. And therefore we established our campaign of protests against DRM, which is in the site defectivebydesign.org. And some of the stickers which we're selling out there are for defectivebydesign.org, such as, for instance, the iBad sticker. So this is what governments are doing when they're against the people and our freedom. But what would a government do if it wanted to actually serve the public? What would it do about copyright? Well, it would reduce copyright power. But how? Here are my proposals. First, there's a dimension of time. Copyright needs to last a lot less time. It should be shorter. I propose 10 years starting from the date of publication. Why starting from the date of publication? Because before the work is published, we don't have copies. So it's an unimportant, purely theoretical question whether we would be allowed to copy our copies that we don't have. So it doesn't matter. We might as well let the author have as long as it takes to arrange publication and then start the clock. Why 10 years? Because, at least in the US and some other places, the publication cycle has been getting shorter and shorter. In the US, most books are sold off cheap within 2 years and out of print within 3. So, 10 years is more than 3 times the usual publication cycle. That ought to be plenty. However, not everyone agrees with this proposal. I once proposed it in a panel discussion with fiction writers, and an award-winning fantasy writer in the panel said, 10 years, absolutely not. Anything more than 5 years is intolerable. Yeah, I was surprised too. Until that moment, I had naively believed that when the publishers said that the authors need more and more time of copyright, that they were telling the truth, that they were, I assume that the authors wanted this too, but that's not so. You see, the publishers that always demand more power over us in the name of these authors, in fact, are grinding these authors into the ground with their heels at every opportunity, with the exception of a few who are really famous, because they have too much clout. The publishers have to treat them with a lot of respect. But all the other authors, well, the publishers can spit on them at will. So this author had a legal dispute with his publisher. You see, his contract said that if his book went out of print, the rights would revert to him. Well, as far as anyone could tell, his book was out of print because they couldn't get copies. But the publisher refused to admit this, and was thus using the copyright on his own book to stop him from distributing copies, which he wanted to do so that people could read his work. Now, this is what every artist starts out wanting. I want people to see my work, and maybe they'll like it, or maybe they won't. But that's why you show your work to anybody else. You want them to see it. A few artists get so much money it corrupts them. And they start wanting the money, more money. I've got $1 million, can I get 2? But this is very rare. Most artists don't get enough money to corrupt them. So they keep on wanting people to appreciate their work. He knew that more than 5 years of copyright was not likely to ever do him any good, but could do him harm, and it was doing him harm. So he said, no more than 5 years. Well, maybe I could go along with that. I'm not saying 10 years is the right number. I'm proposing it as a first adjustment to get into the right range. And then we could wait a while and see the effects, and we could make it shorter or longer a bit. If everyone else would like 5 years, I'll go along with it. I'm proposing 10 years because it's not quite so radical. Because it's clearly comfortably enough. But what about the other question, the breadth of copyright? Which activities should copyright cover? For this, I divide works into 3 broad categories, based on what kind of contribution they make to society. First, there are the works of practical use, the functional works. You use them to do a job in your life. Now, this doesn't mean that there's no aesthetic aspect about them. Their aesthetic aspects can be found in almost any work. The point is that the purpose of these works is to do a job. The second category is works of testimony, works that say what certain people saw or thought or want. And the third category is the works of art and entertainment, whose contribution to society is in the impact of the work itself. 3 different ways that a work can make a contribution to society. And I'm not making any judgment as to which kind is more important, but they're different, and they lead me to different conclusions. First, let's look at the practical functional works, the works that you use to do a job. These include software, recipes for cooking, reference works, educational works, text fonts, and some other things that you can think of. These works must be free. So this is the answer to that original question. How far do these ideas about free software extend? What other things do they extend to? Well, in my opinion, they extend to all the works that you use to do practical jobs in your life. Because if you don't control the work that you're using, you don't control your life. Freedom is having control of your own life, rather than letting someone else have control of it. That's power. If someone else controls your life, that's power. If you control your life, that's freedom. So, these works, people have to be free to change them, but if you've changed the work, you've got to be free to publish your version, because there might be other people who like your version better, because the job they want to do is like the job you wanted to do, or maybe you just made it do the job better. So you should be able to contribute your version to society without any delays. However, it makes no sense to permit the publication of modified versions and restrict the redistribution of the unmodified work, because that just makes people make modifications that don't really change anything in order to get around it. So these works have to be free. And you'll note that cooks are accustomed to using recipes with the same 4 freedoms. Consider, if you cook, you take for granted that you can cook the recipe as you wish, when you wish. That's freedom 0. You're also free to study the recipe and change it so it makes the food you wish. That's freedom 1. Then you might distribute copies to your friends. That's normal between people who cook. That's freedom 2. And if you change the recipe, you can copy that and provide it to your friends. That's freedom 3. It's no accident that we want the same freedoms for software and for recipes and for other works of practical use, because these are the freedoms that give the users control over the works that they use. This is what it takes for the users to control the work instead of the other way around. Now, someone might say, oh, but we can't insist on living in freedom. We have to surrender our freedom, or no one will make these works and there won't be any. And what will we do? So, well, 20 years ago, we didn't know they were mistaken. Now, what I would have said, and did say 20 years ago, was, I don't care how many programs anyone's going to make if they restrict my freedom. I'm just going to make my own programs that I can use in freedom. I'll escape over to there, and to hell with all that proprietary software. I couldn't prove they were wrong. Instead, I said it doesn't matter, because what they're making is only stuff to restrict us. But today, we can see that they're wrong when they claim that unless we give up our freedom, the works won't exist. Look at all the free software that exists now. There are over 20,000 useful free software packages. More than I can possibly keep track of myself. And then look at all the recipes that circulate, whether or not they're officially legally free. All the cooks use them as if they were. And then look at reference works like Wikipedia. There are even starting to be free textbooks. So what this shows is those doomsayers are wrong. We can insist on freedom, and the work still will be made. So we should insist on freedom. That's category 1, the works of practical functional use. What about the second category, works of testimony that say what specific people thought or saw? These include memoirs, essays of opinion, scientific papers, and some other things. And in these works, who says them is crucial. For instance, a scientific paper puts the reputations of its authors on the line. And if it doesn't have people putting their reputations on the line, it's not useful science. For these works, to publish a modified version is just to misrepresent someone else. I don't think that's useful. So there's no reason why it needs to be allowed. But, so we can have a copyright system, but somewhat reduced. What I propose is that copyright should cover all commercial use of these works and all modification. But there's one kind of use that has to be allowed for everyone, and that is sharing. The non-commercial redistribution of exact copies. People must be allowed to share because sharing is good. And to attack sharing is to attack society. And it's the war on sharing that generates the nasty laws. You have to be nasty to people to get them to stop sharing. So this freedom to share non-commercially redistributed exact copies must be available for all published works, including these. So this partly reduced copyright system would cover all commercial use of these works and all modified versions, but we would all be free to share copies of them. Now, this partly reduced copyright system would continue providing income to authors more or less in the same, usually inadequate way as the current copyright system. You see, the fact is the system is usually lousy. Oh, if you are carrying a portable tracking and surveillance device, please switch it off. They've already tracked you here. They know you're listening to me. And if they want to hear my speech, it looks like people are making recordings. Big Brother will be able to listen to these recordings. Big Brother doesn't need to switch on your telephone in eavesdropping mode to listen to what I'm saying now. I mean, Big Brother's agents are welcome here too, right? So everybody's welcome here. So it's okay if you switch it off. So that's the second category, works of testimony. What about art and entertainment? For these works, modification was a problem I had to think about for a long time, because there are arguments both for and against modified versions. The argument against is that an artistic work can have an artistic integrity, and modifying it can destroy that integrity. I think that is sometimes true. But on the other hand, modifying an artistic work can be a contribution to art. Consider, for instance, Shakespeare. Some of his plays used stories taken from other works published a few decades before. If today's copyright had existed then, he would not have been allowed to make those plays. And they would never have been, he couldn't have published them or staged them, so they would not have been written. But after a while, I found a way to reconcile this. Modifying an artistic work can be a contribution to art, but it's not desperately urgent. You could wait 10 years for the copyright on the artistic work to expire, and then publish your modified version. You see, with practical functional works, because we're using them to do practical jobs, we must be free to change them now. And if you change one, you should be free to publish it now in case someone else would like to use it. Whereas with an artistic work, since it will just be a sort of message to people with an impact, it's not so desperately urgent. You can wait 10 years. And you can't wait for today's copyright to expire, because that could be, it can last 150 years. You'd be dead before copyrights would expire to permit you to publish your modified work. But if it only lasted 10 years, that period of time you could wait. So what I propose for art and entertainment is the same partly reduced copyright system, which covers commercial use and modification, but everybody must be free to non-commercially share exact copies of every published work. There's one other issue to mention, and that is remix. Remix means taking little snippets out of various works and putting them together into something that's totally different. Remix just has to be legal, because the whole point of copyright is to promote making works. Well, here's making a work that's totally different. If copyright interferes with this, if copyright is interpreted in a way as to interfere with this, that could only be because companies have taken control over it and distorted it so that it doesn't try to serve its supposed purpose anymore. So these are my proposals for how to change copyright law, and one consequence is that sharing files on the net must be legalized. It's inexcusable to try to stop people from sharing. And the nastiness of the laws that keep getting proposed to try to stop people shows how much this is against human nature. the record companies say, oh, if you share music, you're stealing from the musicians. Now that's utter bullshit. Well, first of all, copying is not theft. I hope you've all seen the marvelous animation by Nina Paley. Copying is not theft. It only takes, it's only a minute long and it's charming. But anyway, you can't steal from somebody what he never got. And the fact is, the record companies mostly don't pay musicians. You see, in the price of the CD, a certain fraction is nominally for the musicians, but they never get it. Because the publicity and production expenses are considered advances to the musicians, which mean, and it's very, very rare that a record sells enough copies to finish repaying those expenses. A record can even go platinum, according to an article that has a sample calculation of what this would be like, without repaying this so-called advance, meaning the musicians don't start to get any money when people buy their records. So, does any musician get any money when people buy his records? Yeah, a few. Long-established superstars who have finished their first contract, and then they had enough clout that they could negotiate another contract which treated them decently and didn't exploit them. They get money if you buy their more recent records. The older records, of course, were still under the first contract, and they don't get any money when they sell those, probably. But for their newer records, they actually do get some money. Of course, those people are rich, and if we changed the legal system so that they didn't sell as many records, it would not be a disaster for them. For the musicians who really don't have enough money, the existing system of copyright is not giving them anything. So, when I buy a commercial CD, which I do, I often feel sad to know that I'm not supporting the musicians. So, how do the musicians get any money, in fact? They get it from concerts and from selling things at their concerts. And so they do get benefit from their record contracts indirectly. You see, this publicity gets done, and if people like the music, then more people will go to their concerts and buy more stuff at their concerts. And they really do get something from that. But there are other ways to give music publicity, like file sharing and sending a copy to your friend and saying, isn't this nice? Listen to it. What do you think? So let's get the companies out of it. These companies have now become more or less parasites, which have a kind of control over music. And they want to use this control to keep getting more control, whereas what we really need is to get rid of them, and that's what they deserve too. You see, these companies have attacked our freedom intentionally. And for that, they deserve total failure. I don't see anything wrong with having record companies, and it might be nice if they really had to pay the musicians. But today's major record companies, which have pushed to attack our freedom, they deserve to be wiped out as punishment for attacking our freedom. What about movies? We've heard that movies cost tremendous amounts to make. Could they possibly be made under my proposals? Yes. First of all, the amounts we've heard, a producer told me they're more than half advertising rather than really making the movie. And second, even the amount for the cost of making the movie has been exaggerated by creative accounting, because that way the studio gets to keep more of the sales. You see, once they get more than the costs, they have to start paying the investor, and maybe they have to start paying taxes. So by exaggerating the cost, they give less to the investors and less to the government, and they keep more. Then you put this together with the fact that a lot of use of movies is commercial use. Broadcasting it is commercial use. Showing it in an airplane is commercial use. Showing it in a theater is commercial use. They would all have to pay just as now. So I think movies would still be made. Of course, interesting and good movies are made nowadays by amateurs and put together using free software. I saw Nasty Old People a few months ago. That was pretty nice. If I remember right, it was released under a license that permits sharing. And meanwhile, Hollywood mostly produces crap. And that's not because of incompetence. It's not because they keep trying to do better and failing. No, it systematically produces crap. It's the system that leads to crap. And I found out how the system works from reading a book called Save the Cat. Now, the stated purpose of this book was to teach people how to write scripts that they could sell to Hollywood. I wasn't interested in trying to do that, but what was interesting to me was it showed why Hollywood systematically makes crap. Now, if people want to make crap, I don't want to try to stop them. I'm against censorship, period. But, so I won't try to stop Hollywood from making crap. But that's not the question. The question is, should we give up our freedom to help them keep making more crap? And there I say no. Meanwhile, so I think if we just legalize sharing, it won't create any disaster. But we might want to support artists better than the current lousy system. The current lousy system supports a few artists very well, and a somewhat larger few adequately, and the rest hardly at all. So, I have some proposals for how to do better, and maybe even with less money. One method is to use tax money. We could use general funds, or we could have a specific tax on something like blank discs or internet connection, and distribute that money to the artists, to the people who worked on things creatively. And we could distribute it based on the success of each one. So that is not having some bureaucrats or some organization deciding who should get how much. There would be some kind of sampling system to measure popularity, and that would determine who gets how much. But it should not be in linear proportion to the popularity. And here's why. Suppose superstar A is 1,000 times as popular as fairly successful good artist B. Well, if we distribute the money in linear proportion, A will get 1,000 times what B gets. And this is using the money inefficiently. Either we have to make, if we want to support B adequately, we have to make A super rich. And that means we have to pay a lot of tax. So what I propose is use the Q group or some other function like this. Well, this way, if A is 1,000 times as popular as B, A will get 10 times as much money as B because the curve tapers off. This is sort of like the converse of a progressive income tax, is a tapering off subsidy. So if we give each superstar around 10 times as much as a fairly successful artist, well, you still get more if you're more successful, but most of the money will not go to superstars. Most of the money will go to support a large number of moderately popular artists adequately. And we could support them adequately with much less total money. And since we wouldn't be giving any to the businesses, it would take the amount of money needed would be even less. So we could support artists much better with less money this way. And by the way, if some people complain, I bought a CD and I didn't use it to copy music or videos or books, why should I have to pay my 10 cents towards this? The response is, who cares? I mean, we're supporting these good things. You know, we build the streets, we support artists, we build trains, and we all pay a certain amount for those things, and some of us use them more, some of us use them less. It's not, you can't make things perfect in that way. And we shouldn't try. Anyway, my other proposal is voluntary payments. Suppose every player had a button you could push, and it would send a certain amount of money to the artists for the piece you're currently playing or the last one. And you could push it if you like. And otherwise, but you don't have to. Nothing bad happens to you if you don't. So maybe in Greece now it should be 20 euro cents. That might be a good amount. In a lot of Europe, I would have said 1 euro was a good amount. Basically, the point is, you want it to be an amount that's big enough that it does some good, but small enough that most people won't hesitate before they send it. So in the US, $1 is a good amount, I think. Most Americans wouldn't mind sending $1 to the artists. Of course, there are poor people who can't afford to do that, and they won't, and that's okay. They don't have to. We don't need to squeeze money out of poor people to support the arts. There are enough people who are not poor who can afford to support the arts somewhat, and they'll be happy to do so if only it were easy. So that's what I'm proposing. Let's make it easy. Right now, if you wanted to go to some trouble, you could find out a way to send some money to some artists. But if it was a small amount of money, they probably would only get half what you sent, which is not good. And you'd have to have a credit card to send it, which rules out a lot of people and means it's not anonymous. It ought to be anonymous. So, but even so, it's starting to work. A lot of musicians are finding that they can support themselves by giving their fans opportunities to give them money. And often the fans get something in exchange, although it's not worth the amount that they're giving, of course, and they know that. And it might be a CD, it might be a shirt. If you give a lot of money to some of them, they'll spend a weekend with you. They're creative. They have all sorts of levels for different amounts of money that people want to give. There are different things you can get. It's starting to work. But of course, it works at higher levels of money. If we want to unleash the power of lots of people supporting someone with small amounts each, we need a system that does that. And suppose that people in a certain place didn't give as much as we hope. And suppose people would like to support the arts more. Well, we could have a PR campaign that is kind and friendly and says, did you send $1 or €1 to some artist this week? Why not? You enjoyed their work. It's only €1. You can afford it. Push the button. You'll feel good. And because this works with human nature, it will be effective. Compare this with the vicious and cruel propaganda that they publish now, which says that if you share, that's theft. They're trying to scare people and lie to people. But this campaign would only ask people to do something good and feel good. So these two are sort of opposite poles of how you can support artists more. And both of them, of course, fit with legalizing sharing. These two ideas can also be combined in a system that was invented by Francis Huguet about a year ago. He died in September. The system is called global patronage. Here's how it works. Every internet subscriber would pay a monthly fee to the ISP. And this fee would be to support artists, and all the money would go to artists. But how would it be divided up? Well, the subscriber would be able to divide up a certain part of it any way she likes. She could say, well, give this part to such and such album, and this part to that movie, and this part to that book, and leave the rest unspecified. You don't have to specify this fraction, but you can, up to a certain fraction, allocate parts of it to various works. Maybe this would be 1/3 of the payment. Well, the money that you specify in this way would go to those works and to the artists who made them. But what about the rest of the money? It would be divided based on the cube root of the success of each artist as measured through how much people decided to give to each work. So the part that you could, of the whole payment, the part you can allocate is how you also measure the popularity of everybody. So, at this point, I'm ready for questions. Actually, no, I forgot. I almost forgot. It's time for the auction. I'm going to auction off this adorable GNU to benefit the Free Software Foundation. So if you want to bid, please wave your hand and shout out the amount you are bidding. The point is, you want me to notice you. I'm going to do my best, but if you don't do both, the chance I may not notice you, and you don't want that. You don't want to get ignored. So you should, if you're going to bid, you should wave your arm and shout 40 euros or whatever. Well, I'm going to start with 25 euros, which is, I've got 25 euros. Do I get 30? I've got 30. Do I get 35? I've got 35. Shout the amount you're bidding. Do I get 40 euros? Do I get 40 euros? I've got 35. Do I get 40? I've got 35. Do I get 40? I've got 40. Do I get 45? I've got, how much? 45. I've got 45. Do I get 50? Do I get 50 euros for this adorable GNU? I've got 50. Do I get 55? I don't know what he said. I've got 50. Do I get 55? By the way, we can take payment through credit cards. The money will go to the Free Software Foundation to defend your freedom. I've got 50. Do I get 55? You? Oh, 100. 100. So I've got 100. Do I get 110? Look, if nobody, are you bidding? I've got 100. Do I get 110? Do I get 110 euros for this adorable GNU? You know, if you have a penguin, you need a GNU. Because as we all know, a penguin can't hardly function without a GNU. So do I get 110? Do I get 110? I've got 110. Do I get 120? I've got 120. Do I get 130? I've got 120. Do I get 130? Do I get 130? Last chance to give 130 euros to support the Free Software Foundation. Do I get 130? Going, gone for 120. Someone has to, or I can also sign the card. That an ordinary pen can do. Yeah, this could. No, I can sign it with this. You can be translated, but only say a few words and let him translate those few words, and then say some more, and he'll translate some more. Pause frequently. Nobody can remember a whole minute of statements to translate them.
You said that under today's copyright, Shakespeare would have been in trouble.
For some of his plays.
Did he copy them word for word?
Oh no! Oh no! He used the same story, and he wrote different dialogue, changed some things.
And this is not allowed under today's copyright?
Under today's copyright law, no. It's a modified version, you see, and today's copyright law prohibits modified versions too. And that was the question. What should we say about modified versions of an artistic work?
You didn't mention any social media companies in your talk. Perplexed by that?
I don't know what social media means.
Okay. So how does
you mean something like indie media?
No, I mean something like Facebook.
Oh, Facebook.
How would Facebook?
So Facebook is a social networking site.
Okay, sorry.
That's mostly a different issue. There are many different ethical and political issues in the digital world. They're not all about copyright. For instance, Facebook mistreats people by collecting lots of personal data from them and about them and making it available for use that can be bad for them. You should not use Facebook. Facebook is a nasty company and it's inevitably going to be nasty. Site called Quit Facebook Day. May 31st is Quit Facebook Today. I can't quit using Facebook because I never started. But those of you who started, you can quit. And you should quit. Don't be defeatist about it. But that issue is totally different.
Some people believe that when they upload the files to Facebook, they are sharing it. Some people believe that.
Well, you might be sharing it. You might be sharing it.
But they don't know another way to share it. What would you say to these people?
Well, there are many other ways. One is have a personal website and put the files on your website. That's how I do it. Another way is you could put it into a file sharing network. If it's big enough for that to be worth the trouble. You know, for a small file, it's just easier if you put it on your website and let people copy it when they want to. But for something bigger, you might want to set up a torrent so as to reduce your bandwidth demands.
And what about copyright?
If you made it, then you're allowed to share it.
But the host provider, where did you go? The host of your homepage.
What about it?
Sometimes the contract is not clear about who is the copyright holder of the files that are on the host.
Oh, well, that's something you should be careful about because and you shouldn't use the companies that make that at all unclear.
Okay, thank you.
What's your answer to the issues the companies use that file sharing makes people lose their jobs? People that work that work for those companies.
So what? Why should we give up our freedom to? Why should we keep a few people employed by giving up our freedom? There are a lot of unemployed people in Europe, and there are a lot of unemployed people in the U.S., and that's a real social problem, and we should, if we had it, of course, our governments ought to do something about this, mainly, you know, provide welfare for the people who can't get work. They shouldn't have signed these free exploitation treaties, these anti-democratic treaties, so that all the factories got replaced by sweatshops in China. These treaties should be abolished. So these are big things that have to be done, but to propose to solve a little piece of this problem by attacking our freedom, that's absurd. Clearly it's just an excuse for what they want anyway.
I believe you've seen the commercials that they use famous stars and say to the people, please stop.
I have not seen these because I don't watch TV. But it's clear, of course, why they use famous stars. Because you see, the famous stars are among the few artists who really do get paid. So you see, you have a large number of artists who don't benefit from the current system, and a few who have succeeded tremendously, and they do succeed. And those are the ones, of course, that everyone's mostly heard of, because some of them I haven't heard of. I'm very happy to be not much in touch with popular culture, that is corporate popular culture, and so I don't know about some of them. I've heard of some of them. But the point is, that's why they use the stars.
Richard, if I may, because there's a big crowd outside and they can't hear the questions from the public, we don't have enough microphones, so I will repeat every question before.
Okay.
Regarding your proposal about keeping a 10-year copyright for for modified versions of artistic works, how do you see that being enforced?
More or less, you know, because they wouldn't be in. You want to repeat the question?
No.
Yes, I see right. First of all, that would be enforced mainly against companies. But I guess, yeah, some individuals might publish a modified version of before it's too late, and I guess they would sue them. But it wouldn't be like today where they're trying to sue people who share.
Here is a question.
Okay, so so you talked about hardware and you talked about the chair and the team, but there's a movement right now of you want like term of open hardware, where people are designing boards and even chips and releasing the source, because there is a source, on the DGL.
Well, I think it's a nice thing to... Oh,
sorry, the question was that there's a movement about open hardware, and what is the opinion of Richard about that?
I'd rather call them free hardware designs, because I'm not a supporter of open. I think they're nice, but the fact is most of us can't turn these hardware designs into hardware. And when hardware is malicious, the malicious stuff is put inside of chips. And there's no way we can change them to remove it.
You talked about mobile phones as a means to...
Actually, a mobile phone, I don't know if the hardware in a mobile phone is malicious. It might just be software that's malicious. For a while, there was a mobile phone being sold where the main computer ran only free software.
And the hardware,
but it failed. So you can't get it now. It failed partly because they didn't get it to work quite right, which is sad. Anyway, at this point, to make a mobile phone that works with only free software, well, some of the Google phones get you close. You can delete most of the non-free software and you lose some extra features, but the phone will still work. However, there are a few non-free programs that it absolutely needs in order to work at all. And so people have to make free replacements for those.
There are free phones.
I can't hear you.
There are free phones. The OpenMoko actually got it working.
They did?
Yeah, actually, there are people that are running OpenMoko. They have an OpenMoko as a primary mobile device.
Oh, well, you see, I keep hearing contradictory things about this. Other people told me it never really worked well. I tried it.
Well, that doesn't, but...
I see, it works and at a level you can live with. I see, well, in that case, it's a shame that they don't make them anymore. I suppose if people were using them, enough people using them, they might fix the various things and make them work reliably. But I haven't kept track since they stopped making them.
I have two questions. The first is about the political part of your ideas. In Europe, we have a few pirate parties. You will have to translate. In Europe, we have a few pirate parties which are in elections, and maybe some electors came into parliament in some countries. Do you think that this is a way of this philosophy to get into the society through the political route?
It's a possible way, yeah.
It is, but it has to have something to start from, something like constitution of the party or something like that. I need a wider comment on that.
I don't understand. I'm lost. I don't understand.
I need a wider comment about the pirate parties that we have.
I don't know what to say wider. I agree for the most part with the programs of the pirate parties, but they differ, of course. There's, with the Swedish pirate party, there's one point where I disagree because it would backfire and hurt free software. But some other pirate parties have adopted programs which don't have that problem. Because they read what I wrote or they talked with me and so on. Now, this is not the only political issue that's important. And so I'm not sure if I were in a European voter whether I would vote for the Pirate Party. I'd have to look at the situation in a particular country. In the recent UK election, I endorsed the Liberal Democrats.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I thought that you would make your own party in order to follow your own field.
No,
because it's easier in Europe to
look,
have a lot of parties here.
How could I, as a foreigner, start a political party?
I mean, if you were a European.
What?
If you were a European, as you said.
I don't know. It would be a complicated decision whether to start a party or support an existing one. It would have to be based on lots of details about an imaginary situation, so we don't know those details.
It's easy.
Other questions?
I have one more, right?
Oh.
Sorry for that. Here in Europe, we have not lost the patent war yet. We are still giving a try to that. We are trying in the European Parliament to make some arrangements in the patent laws.
Do you mean when you say the patent battle? Are you talking about software patents?
No, I'm generally for patents.
Okay, I don't know. I don't know what you mean then.
Okay,
sorry.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, I guess you.
Since I've spoken before.
Okay, then you.
Okay, you spoke about the freedom of software cannot be applied to physical objects.
I didn't say can't be. He said, I said that he thought I said that the freedom appropriate to software can't be applied to physical objects. What I said is, in general, we have those freedoms for physical objects to the extent they are possible.